Yeah. Out of curiosity,
Yes.
when you talk about the budget tonight, are you going to be incorporating the fact that we are having an appraisal too?
And so we're gonna get kind of the early pieces. We're still waiting for what the level of appraisal is now. It's on January,
Oh, good.
but what we're saying is, that was working on, gonna be in good shape.
Why?
It's the appraisal last year.
We're like 144%.
What are we?
No, what are you, you're Duxbury, right?
No, I'm
Are
Waterbury.
you Waterbury? I don't remember what.
All I know is that we're up for.
Yeah, well, I'm Duxbury.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a big.
But you're right, that's the volatility.
I mean, just last year, it just went up, what, 15%, if not more? A lot of money. They're driving me out of my house. You got room?
Yeah.
No, I remember
I don't just get it. Yeah, just my own side.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Right.
Next to you guys. Absolutely. You go. That's fine. I was just happy about that. Always cool.
Oh, well, no.
We didn't know.
Okay. Here's the word concepts.
People are still coming in, so we're gonna give it another couple of minutes and then we'll get started.
Actually, what's the doing?
Well, she's there to take on time. She got it by, yeah.
Because thanks for everybody contributing. Some of the stuff I just applied, I didn't know the answers to. There's a lot of things we got.
And some stuff. That's all I'm like. It's reverse.
Yeah, no, but you guys are.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a good shape now.
I think, I was just saying, it would be nice if we get some new stuff like tonight, with these meetings that we have.
Yeah. There's some coming.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, okay, very good. Okay, good.
She's never a bother. Right then and there. You know, to sneak in and out.
Oh, you have. This is. Oh my God, no, he is. And then how, if I'm down.
Okay. Sarah, sorry for the delay in starting. I'm Ashley Woods, I'm the school board chair. There's a bunch of board members here, Dan Rossdale from Waterbury, Steve and Ben from Moretown, Corey from Waterbury, this is Lisa Essler, our finance director. Bobby Roode is somewhere here, Bobby Roode is over here. And Dr. Mike Neal. So this is our first interface about the budget for this year. So we're gonna approach it a little differently. Thank you all for coming. It makes such a difference when people actually come and we can actually have a dialogue. So we're going to break up into some groups prior to hearing the presentation and have a discussion. So, okay, so I'm gonna let him.
So rather than just all whole group, we wanted to have some opportunity for smaller groups to sit with the board member. And there's two times we're gonna have about a 10-minute conversation. The first is, we wanna know coming into the meeting, what questions you have about the budget. And we wanna make sure we answer those questions going through. And then there's gonna be another conversation later in the program to get your input for the school board and the finance committee as the process continues. Because we're at the very beginning. The board's heard a couple of presentations on what we're seeing from the state. We're still getting information in on, we just received information on from the tax letter. We're waiting for information on what the town CLAs will be that will come in January. So we'll have more information, but the board wanted to have opportunities for conversation earlier than the night before town meeting. So that's part of the reason why there have been two different kinds of forums already. So if we could ask people who are maybe single people or people who are at maybe a table of 2 or 3, if you could get with a larger group, and then we're going to ask you to talk for about 10 minutes about your questions. We have a sheet for the board members who are going to join you to write them out. We'll take a look at those questions here in 10 minutes. You enjoy that, Steve?
Well, so I am on school.
Okay, we'll go about 10 minutes, and then if someone at your table, whether it's a board member or another one of you, can report out, we'll go around to the tables and kind of ask what questions have been generated. We'll put them up, and then that will kind of guide some of our discussion here throughout the next hour and a half.
Best guess is that so the other side. So we know we have You know that it's on. It's a really good question. One of our probably just Yeah, no. I want to show what I said. It's not like that. So bringing it back to the budget. One of our challenges is that spread out. So you got Yeah, so staff.
Three-minute warning.
Yeah, so we're down Part of that is that part that we raised up in
Okay. We're close, we can come back together. Okay, everybody. It seems like a good place to stop. We're gonna come back together and hear from a member of this group, some of their key questions. Anything they want to hear about. Why don't we just read them from the table and then we'll put them all up on the wall or something like that.
Okay, our group had some questions. One is, how is the income rebate program funded at the state level? Where does the property tax rebates, where does that money come from?
It comes out of the education fund. So the money we pay into taxes comes out of that fund, comes back out before it's distributed to schools.
So moving forward, to add to that question, moving forward, with our reappraisal process, potentially doubling most reappraisals in most towns, what impact does that have? If budgets stay level, tax rate should basically be cut in half. Hypothetically. My fear is that schools are going to look at this as a windfall, potentially say, here's our chance to make up what we lost in the last two prior August.
We'll be able to address that.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a slide we talk about that.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll just keep going. Another question, a general question. How will the school board stay within a reasonable budget, given inflationary pressures and all the trouble we had with budget votes last year?
We have that in the presentation as well.
As a question about, I'll put it in my own words, why are we cutting teachers before we cut administrators? And the question of two principals at one school came up.
Okay, we can talk about that. That's not in the presentation. We can talk about that at the end.
And finally, there was a question is, are there administrators who are just, whose job is devoted to DEI issues?
The answer is no.
Okay, why don't you pass that over to Ben and you can, Bobby, whatever.
Okay, one question is, what is the equalized pupil and what are the differences between different districts, for example, Chittenden and our district in terms of equalized pupil?
So some of these, I think, will, based on the questions, I think there's some, we'll continue doing what we do. There's easy answers, we'll give any answers. If they're in the presentation, we'll wait, and something else, we can come back to it. So what do you want to do?
Equalized pupil is basically an average of student enrollments over a 2-year period, and there's different categories. Act 127 changed the categories of students, so there's a different weight for pre-K, high school students, sparsity, English language learners. For instance, it costs more to educate a high school student versus a PK or an elementary student. So there is a different weight to different categories of students. And that's when I talk about LTW-ADM as long-term weighted average daily membership. So that is an average over a 30-day period, the first 30 days of the school, and we average that over 2 years. And then every school district has a different, depending on their enrollment and their average of their weights for different students.
So in other words, Mike, when I was in high school, I was an average kid, so I was worth 1. I was worth extra or less, I was 1. If I didn't speak English, I would have required extra services, a teacher to be hired to help teach students to learn the English language. So there was an extra cost to that. So that's why some students receive a greater weight in that calculation.
And just as Mike's worth 1,
And actually, it may have been worth less than 1 if you talked to some of my teachers.
but an English language learner in the new category of weights is 2.49, so it's a different weight to that student.
So you receive more money because they cost more.
I want to ask the system, but is equalized people the same as weighted people?
It is, yes, so they've now considered it weighted people, with Act 127 being weighted and added categories, yes.
Okay, and are we at, close to, or below the spending threshold and what that means for the tax rate?
Excess spending threshold?
Excess spending threshold, yes.
We are below the excess spending threshold.
But not by much, right? Not by much. We'll talk about that during our presentation.
What are the high-level buckets that make up the budget?
We have that in there.
Yeah.
We have-
Okay, and for the early college program, are the students removed from the pupil count? And where does the money come from for those programs? Is that a loss for our district, or how does that affect the budget?
So for those who don't maybe know kids in school, and first of all, these are really good questions. So early college students can leave the high school and get credits at a college for work that they're doing while they're still in high school. The cost for that, like everything else, comes out of the education fund. So the taxes we pay and the other taxes, that's one of the things that comes out that was created at the state level. Does it count against us? The answer is yes. So the more students who leave our schools, the less funding we get. Now, there is a baseline. They guarantee that we won't lose a certain percentage, but we don't receive the same funding as if they would have been sitting in the class at Harvard.
And,
The second part of that question is,
yeah, and how is that paid for?
It's paid for from the education fund.
to our budget or to the fund?
Well, it's all through the state fund that comes through to us, and we have to pay that.
Do we lose a student and pay out of our budget, or do we lose a student and the state pays? out of the fund?
Basically what I'm.
So we lose a student and we pay for it.
Budget pays for it, and student education.
Student going to the school, tuition for them to go to paying out is paid by the district, by the state.
By the state.
And they said, you only lose up to 5 students. So if 20 students in there, you would lose 20 students in the country.
We lose 5.
We lose five.
And they guarantee a certain threshold that we won't lose all of them.
Joe, just as a follow-up, though, as I understand it, so we lose a student, and also, even though it's going to be, we're not trying to from our budget, it's just less money though to be distributed to all of the public school work.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so we are, I mean,
We're paying for it. It's causing our taxes to increase.
Okay, there was also a question about the cut spend ratio. In other words, so when we make a cut, how is the ratio between our expenditures and income?
It was really a question around we're talking about making some cuts here, and for every dollar that we cut, what does that mean in terms of the increases to tax rate?
Okay. At least we can talk about that in the presentation.
And I think the last one also, when we talk about the buckets of spending, the transportation costs. And concerned that there are buses that are seen now that are not fully used, not full, and what kind of saving could we see there?
And so that's the question. In this district, I was not here during COVID, but schools across the country saw more parents taking their kids to school rather than sending them on a bus. So we do have buses that are not as full as they originally were supposed to be. The challenge is, as part of the board's contract with First Student, they purchased those buses. So we can't say now, oh, take those buses back and buy more small buses because it would cost more money. Buses are very expensive. The costs are around $85,000 for a regular diesel bus. So
Can we add on that question? How long is that bus contract?
it expires this year. So Lisa, actually, if you were to check the request for bids out in the state, we have a request out for contractors to put in bids for transportation for next year.
And they do that.
We're doing tomorrow, yeah.
Have you de-scoped the requirement based on what you're seeing and the use of the current bus?
Yes, so we looked at cutting down the routes.
And I guess one follow-up to that, is there a state requirement for like picking up at the doorstep versus centralized stops?
Vermont does not have, I came from another state that required us to bus. Vermont does not have a requirement other than if you bus, you have to provide full or partial transportation. Now, if it's a student who's a special education student, we are required to provide transportation, but Vermont does not have a requirement that requires the school board to provide transportation. And there's no, it's what's reasonable.
Dan?
Okay, first one's a two-part question that we had. What is going on with moving the administrative offices and or the face in school? And can we save money by moving or closing those?
So for the first part, central office, we're in that lease until the end of next year. And we've already said, when I said the first day I was here, I don't like our offices. I don't think we need to be in a separate office. So we are looking to move out of them, but it'll be at the end of the next school year. So we're exploring where we can put people or divide up to go other places. So that will occur. And then Dan, the second one was the facing school. The board, and we can talk about this as well. The board has asked Truex Collins to work with a committee. The board just last week appointed a committee of 3 board members to work with them to look at some different configurations for options for the school year. So that will be something that actually they have their first meeting next Thursday. That's the process that's going to start to look at what are the options and what are the associated costs. It won't happen for next year. It's a process that'll take time, but that is underway.
Okay, 2 questions about transportation. In regards to consolidating the middle schools, is that too far for Warren students to get to Duxbury daily? And can we reduce transportation costs by letting the furthest distance students go to other school districts if they wanted to?
That's 2 questions. The first one was
Too far to go with one.
people in Warren believe
Oh.
it's too far. Yes.
And that's, so that's something that the facilities group is gonna have to consider with the architects and the designs of the buildings. And then the factor that, the reason the board wanted to go that route and do a bigger study is the last time this has been really looked at by a board was 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and there are needs in all the buildings. So what building, if there's a building that could be closed or used for another use, you also have to consider the age and the work that has to be done. So our largest elementary school, talking about our facilities, our largest elementary school, which is Brookside, is the building in most need of work. So you have to, the board's gonna have to factor in all those related costs to see what makes sense.
There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. It's students who fit into another school and how you divide them. But that is part of the feasibility study that is oncoming with choice now.
Didn't the Brookside, this is about how many years ago, decided to fix Brookside?
Here's a question.
They did put money into the building, but if you look at the building envelope, if you look at the structure, if you look at the needs, long-term needs, it's a building that's 130 years old, and it has the greatest needs. Not after Harvard, it has some of the greatest needs. It was not a complete, full-scale renovation update to the building.
Okay, and then why are costs increasing if we have fewer students?
Also, we can address that in the presentation as well.
And the last one is, is the tax money leading to better test scores? And if not, why?
I'm happy to talk about that one as well.
I think that's good.
Not on the school board, just to speak. Some were already asked, so this worked quite effective. I think going last is even better. The first was what work has been done to look at per pupil spend at each individual school, and is that an equitable cost across the district?
So, for the elementaries, yes, because there's budget planning factors, but it also depends on the enrollment in each school. So we try to be equitable and consistent across our elementary schools, except with our larger school, Brookside, and depending on enrollment. So yes, we are looking at that, and we're also taking that into consideration in terms of increased class sizes for the future.
Is that published somewhere?
We don't have it published anywhere, but we could include that in our annual, we can include that in our annual report. Absolutely. There are budget planning factors that go across all of our schools so that it's equitable for supplies and, for arts and music and for educational supplies, that we make sure that it's equitable and looking at the cost per pupil.
The next question was asked and answered. Our third question, explain the cost share regarding negotiations for insurance. When, who, or is there an option for cost sharing when the healthcare specific costs are negotiated? Is that state level or is that their contract?
So in Vermont, healthcare is managed at the state level. So the school board here has no authority, no role in that. And with that, I can tell you though that there is a premium share, so employees pay 20% of the premium.
That's a state thing?
That's statewide.
That's statewide.
I'm going to segue off that a little bit. In your role on the committee, the statewide committee, is that something the state is looking at, that cost share of health insurance at the teacher employee level?
So the legislator, Teresa Wood, and the other in the legislature appointed a statewide commission on the future of public education. And there's 13 members from across the state on that. I'm the appointee of the Vermont Superintendents Association. So I represent 50-some superintendents across the state on that commission. That is one of the things, it's not a recommendation at this point, but one of the things we mentioned as a piece is for legislation to address that. So the legislature would have to change the current structure and makeup of the Vermont Education Health Initiative in order to make changes to the overall structure. So that's something that's on a list that was generated. I also serve on the Education Finance Committee, and the chair of that is Representative Kornheiser, who's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, so she has that chart. So that's something that is being discussed.
That's great. I think that's honestly, if when you do this pitch to other, I think if you can explain some of that, that would be great, because I think as we all see, it's really a health, issue right now and where the cost drivers are. And if you can't control it, then someone needs to. This one's kind of, gonna be hard probably, but it's, and it's partially asked, I think, it's where are we with considering school consolidation, and are there trigger points that you're looking at, like your school enrollment drops, or where, is there a separate finance discussion on that piece of consolidation?
We just talked about that with the other group.
Right, we are looking at consolidation, period, whether it's, putting school, trying to make a bigger school in Waitsfield to absorb the smaller schools, that is underway. We can't do it without a feasibility study, because we know there's $20 million in deferred maintenance throughout the district. That's in every school. So this study will help us to see what schools are gonna cost a lot to bring up to where they need to be or to fix. Because there's 7 school, there's a lot of schools to consider. So feasibility study is gonna give us a lot of information about each building, how bad it is, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, the role it can play in a different kind of configuration. This school, do we put all the middle school here? All those components are part of the study. And we've pushed that through Truex Collins, who is our historically been working with us as architects, to bring that information to us by mid-January, so we can all hear about it prior to town meeting day. But it is, and there is a committee been formed, with 3 board members. We're looking for a member of the public to join that committee, to be part of understanding the real ins and outs of the deferred maintenance, where it is, what we need to consider when we consider consolidation.
Just putting a recommendation on that, member of the public should be educated in what it costs to build.
Good idea.
It's just, again, a member of the
That would
public's
be really
great,
helpful.
it's gotta be someone who knows the cost.
Good point.
No, I was just gonna add that there are also capital improvements, if we have to enlarge a school to accommodate other students coming from another school. So there could be upfront costs, not only deferred maintenance, but also
And
to
also,
accommodate.
there's currently if we do a bond and we add on a bill of grow a school, that money gets tacked on to the cost per pupil. Right now, the law is right to the
It
cost per
does.
pupil.
It does right now, the way the state's funding education.
Correct.
They- The legislature looks at other options.
And our debt, just to let you know, the debt that we still have on the books is not counted in our educational spend. That changed this past year. Any new debt is counted.
Just, all, or the studies that were done, let's call it 2018-19, are they not being used at all? Because a lot of things you're talking about, where students would go, class sizes, school sizes, what was needed, were in those documents by Truex Collins.
We have all that.
How much of that is informing it? Are we starting over from scratch?
No.
Pushing
No,
the
not
timeline back
starting from
into
scratch.
Yeah.
It's filed on. They have that data. We've seen that. That's definitely part of it. That's one of the reasons to stay with them. They're good at what they do and they have a lot of information. And they know about, like class size, they know a lot of stuff.
They were even know already, so they gave us one.
So we passed by the board $50,000 for their round, for their first 2 phases of information. That is all of what we're talking about right now, the bottom lines on each school.
And the alibis we kind of covered.
Okay. All right, we're gonna move on to the PowerPoint, and then afterwards, we're just gonna ask you if you have questions that we can take with us.
And as we started, the question of school performance came up, and as an academic person in charge of all the schools, what I can share with you is, number one, the state changed their testing last year. So the new testing doesn't equate to the old testing, so we are really kind of at the baseline. but what I can tell you is that U.S. News and World Report annually analyzes across the state test scores and other factors related to performance. And the study released last month lists the top 10 elementary schools in Vermont. 3 of the top 10 elementary schools are in this school district. Harwood ranks number 12 in the state for academics. And so what we're seeing on the metrics is that we are performing well. As somebody who has moved here recently and spent a lot of time on this, what I can also say is that our state agency of education has said that they, up to this point, and I think there's some thoughts in changing it, but they are a regulatory organization. So we don't have statewide recommended curriculum. We have standards, just standards. So there's a lot of things that do not come out from a statewide perspective. We are very much a local control, so there is not a lot of coordination. So it's hard to get a true picture on what that looks like across the state, but based on an independent organization who looks at best schools, colleges, all kinds of things, I think our schools are performing very well overall.
This school was 16 for middle schools. And they based their, some people don't think it's super reputable because they don't have a broad enough thing that they look at, but they look at math scores and literacy scores to choose those in the U.S. News and World Report report.
And of those schools that ranked in the top 10, Waitsfield School came in at number 3 in the state. So the focus, as the Finance Committee and the district has talked about what the focus is going to be, this year's, I don't like to read slides, but this year's budget is focused on cost containment, and the school board is proposing an increase that is aligned with Governor Scott's recommended 3% increase. The governor sent a letter to superintendents and school board members back, I think it was October, saying it's going to be a year where we have a lot of issues with costs again. And I am telling my administration to focus on no more than 3%. Our board talked about that, and the board gave Lisa and me the charge of a budget that does not increase year over year more than 2.75%. So that is one of the focuses, but that will require, based on our funding from last year, we are in the process of reducing our budget by around $2.4 million. So that equates to reductions in staff positions up to probably 15 to 20 staff positions. So they are the pieces of discussion that we're in right now and we're working on right now. And what are some of the primary challenges? Costs are increasing faster than inflation. We were originally told, the question came up about healthcare as an example. We were originally told by the Vermont Education Health Initiative, the statewide board that manages it, that we could expect an increase between 16 and 20%. They used some reserve funds, and that is coming in at 11%. So they are some of the costs that we're seeing that greatly outpace inflation. Lisa mentioned that we went out for a transportation bid. First Student has been our provider. We have extended our contract with them for the past 2 years, and there is a restriction from the state, from the legislature, that if you renew a contract, you can't exceed, I think it's 3%. So if you look at transportation costs, the costs that they are paying for fuel and everything else, their costs are, so we're not sure what that's going to come in at, but we are seeing costs that are going above that amount. So there's some information on here. A budget which provides the same services and programming as last year would have been a 7.3% increase. So that's why our board has said we need to stay under the 3%. We can't increase by 7%. We have to increase in the neighborhood of inflation. And then the other piece is only a fraction of the revenue is generated in the district. So our costs have a limited effect on reducing our taxes. The next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. How our funding system works. So the best example we can give, and we just have 3 districts listed here, but there are over 100 I think it's 116, is that what it is? 116 districts in 50 plus school districts or supervisory unions. So every school district proposes a budget that goes to all of us, and our voters either approve it or reject it. Once a budget's approved from all of those school districts, that bill goes to the state, and that is the total need we have for funding across the state. So Vermont has also been said that Vermont has the most equitable school funding system in the country. And when you look at what that actually means, what it means is we all are equally sharing the pain of generating the money. So that total goes up, and then Representative Wood and the other representative senators have to take a look at all of those, what the tax rate is, all of the other taxes that are used to make up the education fund, which are listed behind me, including homestead, those of us who live here full-time, and non-homesteads, people who have second homes or rentals or other properties, along with other things like sales and use tax, meals, lottery revenues, all the other pieces. So they have to look at all that money, how much money they have in those funds, how much the bills are from all of the schools, and then they take that, they put it through a formula, and unless anyone wants to stay here until midnight, we use the E equals MC squared to explain the formula. So there is a calculation that goes in that Lisa would love to sit down with you someday and talk about, but that then helps determine education fund, how money is allocated, what our costs are, and then what our tax rates are. This is just a slide that lists all of the different revenue sources that I talked about in that last slide. That shows the breakdowns, and then we put all of these slides online. If you go to the HUUSD.org website, there's a link for the business office, and Lisa has a folder in that business office that lists all the presentations so far, and this will go in as of tomorrow morning. So then we can talk a little bit about the last couple of years' budgets and how they have looked at inflation, and Lisa is going to talk about the next couple of slides. Push the button there.
Okay. So what we just wanted to do is show a representation over our approved budgets for the last 3 years and what our proposed budget is for fiscal year '26. If you see year over year, we're slightly above or slightly below inflation. And for fiscal year '26, we're again proposing a year over year increase of 2.75. We don't know what the inflation rate yet will be. Oops, wrong way. So the statewide average for the preliminary budgets for fiscal year '25-26 in the December 1st tax letter was an average of 6.1%. We are looking at, again, a 2.75%. The board gave us a directive of 2.75% increase for our educational budget over the current fiscal year budget. I keep going the wrong way. So having a 2.75% increase year over year in our educational expenses, when you net out our voter approved budget, you're netting out then the revenues, which actually equates to only a 2% increase over our educational spend that we're going to be asking the state to fund us. So even though we have a 2.75% increase in our expenses, when we net out the additional revenue we're projecting to receive in fiscal year '26, our bottom line is only a 2% increase over our educational spend request from the state from the current year.
Lisa, what makes up those revenues?
So we have category aid, we have obviously our tax dollars, we have different types of funding that comes in for our sped ed budget, our special ed budget. We have.
That's federal money.
Some of it's federal, but this is all money that is coming in to offset our general revenues. So that we deduct that net revenue, and we got our educational spend. So this is key, where the governor's recommended less than a 3% increase in educational spending. We're actually netting out to 2% increase in our educational spend. All right, I gotta put my glasses on. So one of the things we did and Mike had mentioned this earlier, so when we pulled together this is based on fiscal year 22-23. We don't have the actual 23-24 numbers posted yet. But in fiscal year 22 and 23, our educational homestead taxes and non-homestead taxes that each of the towns collected totaled $50.7 million. But in fiscal year 23, our voter-approved budget was $42.6 million. So $8.1 million then was dispersed throughout the rest of the state. So 84 cents of every dollar stays within the district, and in fiscal year 23, 16 cents went out of the district to fund other districts throughout the state.
So we, all 6 of our towns, we send 50 million, and we get 42 million back.
And why did we raise an additional 8 million if we didn't need it? Who set that?
Because we fund, as a taxpayer, I help fund all the schools in Vermont.
All the schools in Sterling.
So I'm saying that somebody else set the additional formula that created that 8 million
Yes.
outside of what we actually require. That was something for the state.
Right.
Yes.
That goes to other towns that have higher need for students.
We're
Well, it's
generally
all-
wealthier towns with a very attractive, we're attractive towns to live in, so our home values are generally more than some towns in Vermont.
So, excuse me.
And I will
is
take
that-
questions as we're going along.
Sorry, is
No.
that projected to increase next year, our share that goes out of the district?
It's all based on the tax rate, yes. So it's based on the tax rate and the educational spend, and it changes every year. So these were the numbers for fiscal year 23.
To said another way, there's no incentive for a benefiting school to cut their costs. As the law is
Well-
today.
There is, because there is actually what's called excess threshold. So there is a cost per pupil, and if we exceed that, we will get penalized. That's been on hiatus for a couple of years.
So part of the reason our board told us we had to cut is because we are close to the excess spending. And if we go over that, it's essentially a double tax for the amount you go over that. And we don't want to pay that. We shouldn't, we need to keep our spending and keep lowering our amounts.
I guess what I'm, let me ask it a different way. The legislature passed a law in which is an equitable law in which English as a second language student, that school district, if they have a higher population, is getting a higher amount of funding. Is that correct statement?
Correct.
And if that cost last year was their budget, and they increased their budget by 3, 4, 5%, or even 3%,
So, correct.
you're adding what's already.
Districts with higher weighted students, yes, that are allocated more dollars.
So it's made, perhaps the legislature will do that. Now, one question I have here, though, is if we go back to 2020, our budget was 39 million. Right? That was a projected budget back 4 years ago.
Okay, I don't remember, it is 39 something, but yes.
So we were
Yeah.
here, but that was a projected budget back. We're now at 49 million 4 years ago. And that's our budget, 49, right? That's what I understand.
That's our budget, yes, correct.
That to me sounds very large.
Go back to the
Yeah,
slide.
with inflation, when we go back to the slide for inflation, you'll see in fiscal year 24, inflation was 8%. So when you build in your collective bargaining agreements, your increases, your health benefits were double-digit increases over the last couple of years.
Fuel increase.
Fuel, electricity, propane. I mean, if you look at our total budget, our budget is made up 71% is salaries and benefits. The rest is below the line, but within that below the line, and how I talk about below the line is that what's above the line is salary and benefits. Below are all the operational costs for education. And within that percentage, then you have fixed costs. You have electricity, propane, oil, wood chips, transportation.
And again, for being involved in conversations now across the state, I don't know what is going to happen in this legislative session, but to your point about increases, I can tell you that there is increased talk across the state about instituting a foundation formula, which basically says, this is how much you should spend, and this is how much we're gonna give you, and if you go over that, you gotta get special approval for that. There's also talk, and again, I'm not saying this is gonna happen, but I'm hearing a lot of conversations about an allowable growth calculation on top of that would say you can grow by no more than X amount each year. That's something that's done in other states. I had that in the budget in the state where I moved from. We had an index that we were not allowed to exceed that was based on the state average weekly wage and the national inflationary index for public schools. So there is increased talk about those ideas. So I would expect that we'll hear a lot about them in the next couple of months. So that's, to answer your question of what you can do, that's one of the things that could be done.
I don't need that. It's fine. Is there any talk that you know of, other ways of funding education other than taxes, property taxes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is a debate, and there have been studies. The legislature had a study, I think it was 2 years ago, where they looked at what would happen if you went purely to an income tax-based approach. Without going into great detail, there's pros and cons on each approach. What we have now with the income sensitivity is somewhat of a combination of those ideas. So there are other ways, and like I said, I think you're going to hear a lot of discussion about all of those options in the next couple of months.
Just to be clear, earlier you made a comment, I think your box in green paid out the education fund. So even though 71% of people are eligible for tax credit, those that benefit, the delta costs are thrown on those that are not, right?
Is that the education fund?
To me, that seems like, we can advertise that all day long, and it's not gonna solve the problem.
No, but we just make it available. Yeah.
But that should be paid for from someplace.
And it gets paid from the education.
Well, we have an aging population, right?
Right.
Retired, if more people become eligible, that number is 75%.
Quick question, just for those of us that can't hear, when you have the microphone, can you just repeat the question that's being asked before you answer it?
My apologies. So what we know for fiscal year 26, preliminary numbers came out in the December 1st tax letter. There is a statewide adjustment, CLAs, estimated CLAs with the statewide adjustment are in that tax letter. And it's also, I can share the link, it's in my previous slides, in my previous slide decks on the website. But we are looking at less than a 6% increase, statewide average tax increase compared to last year of an average of 18.5%. The governor's again, we've mentioned this earlier, the governor's letter came out and requesting everyone to target less than 3% year-over-year increase in their educational spend. I'm sorry this is so small, but I was trying to fit in a lot here. So our proposed budget for fiscal year 26, as we mentioned, is 2.75%. What I wanted to show here is our different categories. Here's our expense categories and the description of each of those categories. But you'll see in fiscal year 25, our budget was $47.8 million. If we continued with level service, and we mentioned this earlier, it would have been a 7.3% increase or a $3.4 million increase from level service. At the time, we knew it would have been $51.3 million for our budget for fiscal year 26. So looking at, the board gave us a charge for getting it under that 3%, which is 2.75%. So we are looking at below the line cuts and also cuts in our FTEs, our staff. Questions?
Steve?
So at one point, either you or Mike mentioned this might involve cutting 15 or 20 staff positions. How many of those positions would be covered by kind of retirements or attrition, so kind of soft limits?
So the few retirements that we've heard in the wind would have to be replaced, they're classroom teachers. So right now, we don't have any soft FTEs. But again, this is very preliminary. And also the number fluctuates depending on, because we have to look at the seniority list, bumping privileges, and then what the actual salary and the benefits cost for each, because a teacher versus a power versus something else, the wages of labor, including salaries and benefits, vary. So we are looking from anywhere from 15 to 20 FTEs. Any questions?
When you're looking at, no,
When you're looking at FTE cuts and you're looking across the board, are you looking at the potential where you're able to increase class sizes?
So that's one of the things we are looking at, is what schools can increase class sizes by combining those class sizes. Brookside, where we can, we're trying to reduce classroom teachers and increase class sizes.
And just to note, the school board finance committee, Dan here has done a lot of work on a frequently asked questions with some other board members, Steve, and some other board, and that will be published soon, but it addresses staffing and it addresses administrators, which was discussed earlier. There are regulations, State Board of Education regulations, that say how many we can have per class. It also says how many principals we have to have. So for example, on the principal side, it says, if you have 10 staff members, full-time staff members, you must have one principal. So that's one of the reasons why we have the number of principals we do. We operate 7 buildings. 7 buildings with 1,700 students. So that's one of the other reasons in that frequently asked questions they discuss scale and consolidation. There was another study that was updated at the state level this year. It's called the PICA study. It's a really good report. It's also somewhat based on national averages. So what they say is that if you look across the country, if you look, for example, at an average elementary school, a school that makes the most of its scale, what's the optimal number for a school? The optimal number for an elementary school is around 400. Vermont has very few elementary schools that have 400 or more, but 400 is when you can start to see some of those optimizations and see some of the reductions. So that is staff members and also with teachers. That's one of the challenges that we face and other schools in Vermont face because of our size of schools.
I have a question. On the free meal program, where is that funding come from? Is that in the budget?
So the universal meal program, I think it's around $50 million. It's from the education fund.
So, I mean, is that what we discussed?
That's on, we on the large list we have, it's one of the things that's on the list.
I can talk about it.
Okay.
But then, so there's talk of increasing class size, but in a school that has, let's say, 1, 5, 6 grade class of 17 kids, are you talking about making 2, 3 to 6 grade classes?
Well, then that's
How do you do that on a small, I don't get how you do that.
That's the biggest challenge that we have, because if you look at our class size numbers based against what the state says we have to maintain, we don't have a lot of fat in those areas. So if you have, for example, the Waitsfield School. The Waitsfield School is at capacity. There is essentially, if you look at the number of students, there's not a lot, our class sizes are towards those allowable sizes. And what we do, what this school district does, the reason we have combined classes, grades 1 and 2, is because, first of all, you're trying to take advantage of the fact that you are smaller and that you want to have greater ability to balance class size, but also you want to have greater ability for students who are in a small school and are with each other from pre-kindergarten through 6th grade. You don't want to have the same, educationally, you don't want to have the same students sitting in the same classes with the same peers for 8 years. So there's a couple of reasons that we do that, and that's what makes it hard in particularly our valley schools to really increase class size, because we are not, again, at very small classes like you may have heard some schools in the state.
So. Good, yeah. But, so again, this is a mystery to me, right? So, back in the early 2019, 2018, 2016, whatever, when that study was done before, one of the targeted schools was Faith and the other was Moretown. There was a lot sensitive. I know the senator, I think, a few weeks ago said it's always sensitive to close a school. It's very hard, particularly when you're a legislator for that district. If we were to pull that thread and said student population, classroom sizes at our schools, back to equitable, what has been done per pupil spent at each individual school, what's the classroom size in Facein versus Brookside?
Right now, again, it depends on the grade level, but for the most part, the Facein school has larger class sizes. In fact, next year, the 5th, 6th grade has, going into next year, we have, what's the number, Lisa? You were just talking to Justina today. But it's close to, it would be close to 30 students in a class, which is well over what the requirement is. So as an example, where if we have 30 kids in a class, we can't have that many according to the state standards, so we have to add a teacher in that grade level, which adds cost. If you had a school with 10, and this is not possible in Vermont, but if you had a school with 10 classrooms per grade, there's greater ability to adapt and to balance out those classes within one grade. The Facein school, one of the challenges that the board has discussed is we have about 115 students pre-K through 12. So when there's a statewide discussion about the number of small schools we have, yes, 115 by national standards is a small school. But Vermont has a very large number, I can't remember the exact offhand, but we have a great number that are under 75 students. And even under 50 as well. That's one of the reasons why a neighboring district closed the Roxbury School, because of the small size of the building. What gets challenging, and that's one of the things the board is looking at, 115 students we've seen actually over the last 4 years, the growth of enrollment at the Facein school. So if the board were to say tomorrow, and for those watching in TV land, we're not saying that this is being discussed currently, but if the board were to say tomorrow the Facein school is closing, you would have to divide those students up. And the articles of agreement say that families in a closed school have the right to go to the next closest school. We've looked at the numbers of how many students would go to the Warren School, would go to the Waitsfield School. We don't have capacity currently in the Waitsfield School to absorb the students from the Facein school. So that's why, from a district-wide perspective, that's why the board has asked the committee of the board to take a look at the complexities of what would be involved in reconfiguration. It's not an easy answer like anything involved in the funding of our schools currently is in Vermont.
Mike, I've got a few comments I'd like to
Go
make
ahead,
at some point.
How far are we? Why don't we take one more question, Chris, and we'll come back to you when we get to the last slide.
I was wondering, since we brought up the free meals, which I thought was a great question, look on a state level, the early college program and how we are losing the credit for students who go. I recognize in a perfect world, if we had loads of money, that's a great program, but I feel like we're sort of cannibalizing our own district or districts of the state. We can't, I feel like it's an expensive program and a vast program. How can we, on a state level, really continue using money from the education fund to pay for programs to support the colleges and lose our student credits? I just don't see how we can pay for both. I feel like we're cannibalizing the public school system to pay for kids to go to early college. I don't understand why we're doing that, other than trying to support maybe colleges that aren't thriving. But it seems like that's money spent that should really be used for the public school system. And I don't know, I know you're on that committee, I didn't know if that came up at all.
It has.
Okay.
Yes. And that's one of the concerns, because when we incent people while they're still in college and they pay for those courses, we are taking them out of the classroom, and in a state that's already decreasing of enrollment, that's one of the challenges. And on kind of a basic analysis, it was also asked, for enrollments declining, why are our costs staying the same? And what I will first say, as a state, our enrollment has been declining. Harwood, all these schools in our 6 towns, over the last 10 years, our enrollment has been declining. Our particular school district for the last 4 years, I just shared a new enrollment projection report with the board. We have, starting with COVID and then post-COVID, we have stayed relatively stable. So our numbers are pretty consistent for 4 years. If you looked at the projections from 5 years ago, those projections were calling for a significant number less than we currently have. So there have been people through the last 4 years who moved to our towns. We have maintained some level of student, but it is hard though. If you're losing, and one of the examples I give is if we lose 20 students next year, all right, we have not lost that amount, but if we lose 20 students, kindergarten through 12th grade across 7 schools, you know, if those 20 students were in Brookside, we could reduce a teacher. Those 20 students that you lose, slowly over time, there could be 2 from Brookside, one could be in 1st grade, one could be in 5th grade, there could be 3 students in here in grades 5, 7, and 8. There could be 5 students at Harwood, grades 7 through 12. So you don't get a mass to be able to make a significant cut, even though our funding is per student averaged over a couple of years. So even though you're losing that funding, you're not necessarily having a mass in one particular area that you can make easy cuts, which is why you get to a point where we are now, where we have to make a significant reduction and examine the kinds of programs we're providing. Lisa, how are we, you want to talk about the consolidation?
So we briefly mentioned this before with the architect, Rex Collins, and the group that we formed, the Facilities Visioning Committee. Is that what we?
Building Use and Visioning.
Building Use and Visioning Committee. So we're looking at consolidation, reconfiguration, possible closures, so what are the pros and cons of that? Long-term cost in reduction in costs, also having provide wider set of services across all schools, but there are cons to those consolidation and reconfiguration. There could be short-term increases in costs if we need to add to capital to take care of any capital needs to have that influx of students coming in. And then the loss of local community centers if we end up closing a school, and then also additional travel between the different schools. So these are the things that we're considering, traveling also in terms of bus transportation too. So these are the things that we have to look at when we're working with this committee.
So Chris, we said we're going to give you a chance here. So what we're going to do is the next slide should be, to your point, we want to do one last 10-minute check-in for each groups and go around and have everyone give us their comments. So these are suggestions, comments, pieces that you have for the board, and the reason we want to do them in groups with papers so that they can be written down, the finance committee can take them, list them out, and that's what we have been doing. That's what the finance committee has done with the frequently asked questions. They took all the information that came back in the survey, analyzed it, and listed it out. So that's something we want to do. We'll get a bit of chance for people at each table then to report out to the table, if that works for everyone. Okay, let's take about 10 minutes. We want to issue another, we can do another, we'll put another sheet out.
the school, staff looked at what are they ever talking about? Now, that's been complete failure in my eyes. They haven't had a problem. That's all we have to work with. Let's use that as a number. Again, I've heard from the radio on like that down. State communities that are already at the edge, 6% is what is 85%. It's still a three
Yes, inflation increases the price, but our budget doesn't increase. My opinion, that's how it works. It's not just saying that is a lot of people that say that because.
That's a good question. We can use that next.
Okay, everybody, that's been about 10 minutes. If we're ready, we'll come back together. So if we've come up with any follow-up questions, we are going to keep these papers and we will add these to the questions we're working on and potentially put them in the FAQ. So why don't we start over here? You want to start? Is there anything new?
Yeah, I think, first question was, is our district realizing and capturing as much of the Medicaid reimbursement opportunities as possible to offset costs?
Yes.
Okay, second one kind of dives into the next one, but just a suggestion as to, jump in if I'm getting this wrong, but as the board is looking at the long-term strategy and cost benefit of building something bigger to, it might cost more now, but in the long run it's going to pay off, and how that plays into the planning. Just a suggestion to make sure that is considered.
That's definitely what we're doing.
So part of the charge will be for the architects to give the cost benefit analysis. So what would be the upfront initial cost annualized over 20 or 25 years of the bond, and then what would we realize in operational savings? And take a look at what those two pieces are.
Next, and this is somewhat against that theme, was that, what are we going to do, in the relative short term to have an actionable plan, to bring as part of the budget where we don't get stuck in another cycle of looking at doing another thing that is 5-10 years down the horizon, and here we sit 10 years from now, not having made any significant change. We talked about how the state has done approximately 15 studies on education funding since 2004, and Harvard has had X number of discussions on renovations and these issues, and here we sit. So while we want to look at long-term strategy, the suggestion is also, come to the table with an actionable, definable plan to start making a difference. And not just, cost cutting is going to happen, but that can't be the only thing.
That's
Shouldn't
true.
be the only thing.
That is the plan is to have an actionable plan and then bring it to voters next year and the year after as we walk through the growth and changes. What else?
And finally, it's just when that time comes, the suggestion is to, have I just well-defined, marketing plan and PR plan to outline the benefits of it, so we don't end up having people looking at the short end of the stick and how it's going to affect them and their student right now versus what is good for the district, and articulate that in a coherent fashion going forward.
We have some great people involved to help us make that messaging clear. We realize that. That's definitely, it's hard to get everybody on the same page. Every time I go out, I hear something crazy that I can't believe somebody thinks, but that is definitely, we have people from the community, people on the board, people in the admin, everyone working together for that messaging. Dan?
How many places are bidding on the transportation contract?
No, bids are not due back until tomorrow morning, we open up publicly in central office at 2:30. So, to date, I only received.
And that's from first student.
It dropped off, that's what I'm.
Yeah, they're sealed bids.
Okay, so there's one in there. Really hopeful they'll get them.
Along those lines, we used to do that school employees during transportation. Is that possible?
Can you speak up, please?
He said it used to be that school employees ran transportation, and is that a possibility? Elaborate, what does that mean?
Do you want to?
Yeah, well, we used to read that there was someone in charge of busing. It was a supervisor, had people who were the bus drivers. And as the school owned the buses and.
I remember those good old days. That is tricky because we do this on a district-wide basis. So having buses per building, and we had our own buses in Warren for years. Our principal just battled Bridget and kept his buses and kept them on the road. We went to school all the time, and it was really great, that independent control. But that's tricky with this giant. Now that we're all merged, that's one of those bigger expenses.
A comment about property taxes can't be the backstop of the money. Right now, it's kind of whatever, everything else doesn't cover, it gets thrown out property taxes. And the property tax notifications should go up earlier, so I think with the budget, their personal finances to be able to pay for property taxes. And a question about what other districts are looking at for percent increases this year, because that's what other.
The the statewide average according to the tax commissioner is 6.1%. So they go the gamut. I saw, yesterday I had a meeting with the superintendent from Champlain Valley. Their budget's out there and they are looking at significant cuts as well. So, but there's some places that are smaller. And there's also some places, for example, where Lisa's just south now. She used to live in Warren, but now she's south in Granville. They have a school district, but they're not an operating school district. So they tuition all of their students. So there are school districts like that are at the mercy of other schools that they really can't cut their budget because their budget is tuition to other schools. So, I think that's why they run the gamut of some places. Some places just don't have the flexibility that we have because we have a larger district by Vermont standards.
When we were at we went to this conference for the School Board Association, and we learned just in a group setting that, we feel like 71% of our budget is people and benefits. There are districts in the state where that number is more like 90, 92, because they come from different supervisor unions or districts where they are at everyone else's mercy. They have no choices. They have like one grade school and then everything else is out of their control. So we're kind of, it's a little less bleak for us than it is for some others, I guess, I'm saying. What else you got?
Are we thinking about or talking about what the Trump administration might be for education spending?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's something that that Vermont Superintendent's Association and Lisa's Vermont Association of School Business Officials, that's something we're talking about. I have an analysis actually I can give to our school board of what potential cuts could be in federal funding. We receive federal Title I money. We receive, it's called a flow through, but the special education money comes from the federal government to the state and then it's distributed. There are potential for reductions in a number of areas that could impact. Our federal funding is just a small percentage, but what percentage is it? 1%, Lisa? It's 1.2, but still that's $500,000, $600,000. So there are things that we're paying attention to.
Steve? Oh, sorry.
I'm going all the way backwards.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, and then I think, a number of things, let's look at it. Big points. One is looking at the, if our costs per pupil are in the top tier, but we're showing reasonable expenditures in different categories and not being, being no fat. Still, why are our costs that high per pupil? What is it that drives our costs that puts us in the top tier? And that was, this is a historical question. This isn't something that just happened overnight. So wondering what that is. And the flip side of that is, it's great to be looking at cutting costs, but what are we sacrificing in terms of quality? And I mean, nobody, I could just say as a board member, nobody wants to sacrifice quality. Nobody wants to fire teachers. And in fact, we could reduce our per pupil, we could have no gain in that at 0%. We talked about it in a finance committee meeting last night, and it makes a very small difference in terms of what we have to cut. So I guess trying to help us figure out how we can continue to make our district appealing to young families and bringing in more students, and at the same time keep our costs within a reasonable framework. And yet also have some control over the quality of what we think is important to spend our money on. So multiple tiers. And then just charging us to really look carefully at the early college program and what that might be doing to our schools by taking money from the education fund, which is set up for our public education. That was it. Oh, and transportation, and I think there were the pros and cons in Lisa's slides, but if we talk about consolidation, with some of the cuts we've made in transportation this year, some of the buses are very crowded. So we have some buses leaving empty and others, particularly with older students, as you get sports bags and all kinds of equipment that come onto the bus and narrow seats, so we have to be looking at that.
Yeah, those are all great questions.
Why is that important?
So we had kind of one question and maybe a long extended comment. So the question was, closing Facein and Moortown, wasn't that studied and discussed at great length several years ago? And what's new about the discussion now?
More people want consolidation, or I think more people want to consider consolidation. It always comes back to the heart of the town. That's a hard one. It's hard enough for any town to swallow closing their school. I think given the pressure, plus the amount of deferred maintenance spread all over, so we need to know more about that. I think it's more relevant now as our taxes go through the roof. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we're more inclined to consolidate. My worry is we're gonna find out it's so expensive that it's gonna feel not worth it to the taxpayers of this generation. Our generation who's currently paying taxes are going to, prepare for the next generation, but we're gonna pay. And that, if we enlarge the Waitsfield School, we're gonna pay. If we change the school, we're gonna pay. But we're gonna turn those rocks over thoroughly. And yes, there have been multiple studies before anybody on the board was on the board. Or before these two people came to work here. So kind of in the highest pressure time perhaps because of our new big government as well as our insane tax increases from last year. So that's a great question. I hope we're doing well. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, you can make one more comment and then Chris.
There was also a lot of discussion at the table. People, if I paraphrase it correctly, people said, okay, tax rates are going down from 16% to maybe 6%, but the board shouldn't be patting itself on the back. This is it's a big increase. A lot of families in the district are living on the edge. These taxes are a real burden, and people feel that they're going to be forced to leave. So, it's kind of resonated with me when Bobby said, we want to attract new families, but we also have the families who have been here for years and years. This is a very difficult time, and the board's work is far from done.
I agree with that. There's no one on the board patting themselves on the back. There's a lot of us scratching ourselves on the head. And there's no, we're all in it together. I'm paying taxes in Warren, and everybody here is paying taxes somewhere, and we're all paying as much. We know that.
I guess I would say that you do deserve some patting on the back. You're a volunteer, so it's not a very big responsibility that clearly very few people are interested in taking on. So you do deserve a little bit of a pat on the back.
Yeah, I think Steve might have phrased that a little bit different than what it was conveyed as being, in no fault of his. So as a former select board member of Waterbury for 10 years, Mike knows that, one of the things that I noticed being on the board was that elected officials always try to be everything to everybody. And that has put us, unfortunately, in the position that we're in today, along with many other factors. I had mentioned earlier that during COVID, the state was given $1 billion. And the reason I know that is because the former minority whip, who's a friend of mine, told me that. We could visit the past and look at where all that money got spent, but from my view, it should have been used to right the ship of all the wrongs that we were facing in the state, but instead, a lot of it, in my opinion, got probably misspent. We're no better off now after having $1 billion given to us than we were before COVID. So it doesn't make sense to me. The logic's not there. I think at this point, the state and the school system is so close to the cliff, it's almost like we're at the 11th hour. These increases of, you guys have done an honorable job of trying to keep it at 2.75, but from what I'm hearing Mike talk about, we're looking at, with everything included, a possible 6%. That's why I said earlier in the evening that maybe if the Scott administration might buy that down a little bit. That's what I've heard through the grapevine. There's so many people right now struggling at such big proportions that any increase is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for them to swallow. I came here tonight because I missed the meeting 3 weeks ago. I did watch the video today, and I had 3 pages of notes and comments that I consolidated down to one, and these are mostly comments. In the video, it was suggested by one of the panelists that they believe that education is fundamental to a successful and robust democracy. In large part, I agree with that sentiment, but unfortunately, under the current consolidation, convoluted and costly structured system, it's having, in my opinion, more of a detrimental impact to many of the community members of which those efforts were meant to help. Based on the financial health of this overall state, and this is where I think the problem lies, I see no logical, cost-effective way out of this problem. If you're looking from the perspective of different cost funding mechanisms, I'll give you a short list of what I see our overall state government's problems that they're facing with. The state is faced with over $4 billion pension. Our state pension program is $4 billion in the red. Out of control healthcare costs, insurance costs, right? It was on the radio this morning that the state of Vermont was #1 highest in the state at 27% increase in insurance premiums this year. The next lowest state to us was 19%. Now, it sounds like those have been revised a little bit in some manner, but I think the overall number started out at 27%. Out of control health, our hospitals and colleges across the state are hemorrhaging for more money. Green Mountain Transit just stated that they're $3 million in the red. We have a growing housing problem. We have a growing drug and crime problem. Statewide schools are in disrepair to six to what I believe is going to be closer to $8 billion. It was suggested that a $3 million budget proposal or increase or cost analysis of $300 million a year for 21 years equals that $6 billion. But if you include inflation over that 21-year period, I think you're probably closer to $8 billion. Now, I don't know where you're going to dig that out of your butt on top of these other issues that they're faced with. So to look for alternative cost funding mechanisms is going to be a really hard, tough hill to climb. So at the end of the day, I commend the school board for doing what they've done. I wish you all luck in the future, and let's hope that the state legislature comes up with some ideas that are going to end this problem for a lot of the people that are suffering.
You mind sharing your notes?
Sure.
Thanks very much. Anybody else, questions, comments before we wind? We do appreciate this so much. We'll do Ben and then.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm one of the only board members who actually have been quite silent tonight. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank everyone for coming this evening, but also wanted to just let you know that behind the scenes, board members, what you're not seeing is that even on camera and off camera, board members are really hard at work trying to think about how we can do the very best we can do with the very least amount of tax dollars we can get away with. We just want to let you know that if we have to take tax dollars, it's because we are trying to do the very best we can do with the responsibility that we've been given, which is the care of the district's children. So we're balancing, right, the tax bills with the care of the kids, and we're trying to figure out a way forward. But we're trying to do all of that with the background noise of the state and their formulas and the changing targets. And we're trying to do all of this with us trying to trying to play catch up. I just wanted to let you know sort of the human side of that, which is even when you don't see the cameras on, even when you don't see us giving speeches, even when you don't see what's going on, we're really hard at work behind the scenes trying to get the business done for you. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Last comment?
I just wanted to say, hey, thank you for everything you've done. It's amazing hard work. Thanks for all the work behind the scenes. I think, one of the things that I've just been noticing, and I didn't really want to make a suggestion because it's more statewide, but, Harwood, our district has its issues and our spending problems, but I think, Mike has said it, other people said it. There are much smaller schools with bigger budgets and other things, and I just wanted to make the suggestion while I had the chance of saying, if you can make the message of the state of find any way to tie local spending to local taxation, I think is a huge problem. As you said, we can make all these changes with this district, but it's only going to change, X% of our taxes, and it's not going to make the fundamental change. These smaller districts, these smaller towns that you hear about, 40-person high schools, that sort of thing. When we're paying for that, and also the highest cost of living areas of the state, being tourist towns, it's painful. And it makes you want to move out to a small town, spend more fossil fuels driving to work, have lower taxes, and create whatever school district you want for your kids. It's a weird, messed up system where nothing is tied together, and that's probably part of the problem. Local control without local spending cost is not local control.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for coming. We're going to do this again in January. Your participation has been great.
Chris?